Today's DAF is in the Pesachim Nun Vav Marav. We're just starting on the bottom of Nun Hen Bebeis of the Mishnah. Shisha Dvarim Asu Anshe Yericho. So there's 6 things that the Jews of Yericho did. Shlosha Nichu Bi'adam. So with respect to 3 of them, the Chachamim protested. But on 3 of them, the Chacham didn't protest. The implication is, though, that the rabbis weren't really happy with any of the things. Just a question of, picking your battles, right? So these are the things that the rabbis didn't protest against the Jews of Jericho, right? Markivin dekalim kol hayom. So they would graft palm trees all day on Erev Pesach. So, that's related. This is, one thing that's most closely related to our general topic. It's talking about what kind of malacha you can do on Erev Pesach, right? They would wrap together the Shema, which we'll see what that means in the Gemara. They would harvest and stack the grain before the Omer. It means like the grain which would be usher to eat on account of Chadash, right? They would harvest it and make it into piles before the Korban Omer was brought. Okay, so those are those 3 things that they didn't protest. And these are the things that the Chacham did protest. Matirin gamzios shel hektish. They would permit these growths from the sycamore trees. So the idea is that previously the branches had been chopped, and then the trunks had been consecrated, had been made hektish, and then the new branches grew, and then they said, well, these new branches don't have the status of hektish, right? Ochlin mitachas and Asharim b'Shabbos, and they would eat from these fallen fruit on Shabbos that fell from the tree. V'nosin peah li'arak, and they would set aside peah, the corner of the field, for the poor, for vegetables. These are things that the Chacham protested against them for doing.
Did somebody think that Jericho was a city of Goyim?
A city of what?
Well, this isn't the Yericho they destroyed in the beginning. Because they destroyed the Yericho in the beginning of Yeshua, but then obviously there was a Yericho that was built subsequently.
So it must be that they were chased out or killed or something. Did somebody think about it?
There's a Jericho today, isn't there?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right, but the Arabs weren't living there in those days. Okay, in the days of the Mishnah. Okay. Okay, Gemara. Tanur Rabbanan. Shani Shishit Varam Asa Chizki HaMelech. So Chizkiah. So this is kind of similar. Jericho did 6 things. King Chizkiah also did 6 things. On 3 of them, Chacham agreed to his course of action. And 3 things they did not agree to his course of action. First of all, Girat Samos Aviv Al Mitash Chavalim. He dragged the bones of his father Achaz, who was one of the wicked kings. He dragged his father's bones on a bed of ropes, which is an undignified way of an undignified kind of funeral procession, right? So it was a way of highlighting the fact that his father was a wicked man. Right? He ground up the copper snake that Moshe Rabbeinu made, and they agreed to him because it had become like a kind of a bit of an avodah zarah for the Bnei Yisrael. They kind of misinterpreted this role. Gana Sefer Refuos v'Hodulo, and then he hid a book of medicines, and they also agreed to him to that. Rashi says the idea of the Sefer Refuos was that people were having trouble being properly humble because they'd have this book which all the cures were available, and they wouldn't feel such a need to daven to Hashem. It's interesting that if you look in Rambam Perush Mishnah, he actually takes great exception to this approach. Sorry?
He was a doctor.
Yeah, he doesn't like this. Maybe it's related to the fact he was a doctor. He doesn't like this approach to the Sefer Refuos. He says, is it a chesaron b'tachon if I'm hungry and I go eat some food, right? So why is it that if I go and cure myself, why is that considered a chesaron b'tachon, right? You can go to the doctor and say tehillim too, right? So Rambam's preferred approach is that the Sefer Refuos was not a book of cures that actually worked, but rather it was either a book of superstitious witchcraft kind of practices, or it had to do with poisons and their antidotes, and people were using it to assassinate each other. So anyways, we have this machlokas Rishonim exactly what's going on with the Sefer Refuos. Okay. Vashlosha lo hodulo. So on there's 3 things that Chizkiah did that the Chacham did not agree with him. Kitzitz lasos shel heichal. He cut off the doors of the heichal. V'shigron lemelech Ashur, so he sent them as like a present to the king of Assyria. V'lo hodilo, and they did not agree with him. Sasa me gichon ha'elyon, he closed off the upper waters of the Gichon, or that spring. V'lo hodilo, and they did not agree to him. Rashi frames it in terms of bitachon. He was trying to cut off water from the enemy troops. Could be there were other issues. Maybe it was an overly expensive project. But anyways, Rashi frames it in terms of bitachon, right? Iver Nisan b'Nisan. And then another thing he did, which they didn't like, was that he created an extra month, but it was already Nisan, which, if you look in the Gemara, which discusses this more thoroughly, it wasn't literally Nisan. It was the 30th of Adar, which could be Nisan, which is when he decided to make an extra month. And you're supposed to really do it a lot earlier. So he decided to do to add an extra month very late in the game. V'lahodin Lacham didn't agree to this course of action either. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the things that the Anshe Richo did. Markim the Kalam Kol Yom. Heichi Abdi. So how does this business of grafting palm trees work? Amar Rav Yehuda, Maisi asa dara v'shechra the dafna. So they would take like a fresh myrtle, v'shechra the dafna, and the beer made from laurel trees. Sounds like, right? V'kimcha the sari and barley flour. The rami b'mana the lo chalfi alei arba'in yamin. Right. That was in a vessel which is not changed for 40 days. Okay. Right. So they would boil it up, v'shadaluhu the dikla, and then throw it the belibe, throw it to the heart of the palm tree. Okay. V'kol dekai Barba Amas today, and they would also throw it in all the other trees which were in the 4 amas of that tree. Tzvi altar. Otherwise, the other trees around it would end up being dried out, just because this tree in which they put this particular concoction in would draw all the nourishment, and those other trees wouldn't survive. Okay, so that's the idea. I'm not exactly sure how this formula works, but okay, so we'll go on. Ravacha Breid Rava. Amar, he said, Manchi Kufra Dichra Lenukvasa. They would put a male palm tree, just connecting a male palm tree to a female palm tree. This is much more straightforward, exactly what's going on here. Okay. Shema. So they would wrap the Shema. Heichi Abdi. So what would they do? What does this mean? They would wrap the Shema. Amar Yehuda. Omrim, they would say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And they would not create a pause, right, in among those words. Okay, right. So Tosis explains that the problem was that it sounds like they're saying God listened to Israel, which is not what the pasuk is saying, right? Okay. Rava Amar. Rava says they would actually create proper pauses in the pasuk. They would say Hayom al levavecha, which is there's supposed to be a pause, right? It's not. It should be Hayom al levavecha instead of saying Hayom al levavecha, which implies as follows, right? The mashma Hayom al levavecha only today needs to be on your heart, but not tomorrow. It doesn't need to be tomorrow on your heart. Tanur Rabbanan. In case that
what's the issue?
Sorry?
What's the issue here?
Because it's implying that you only the words of Shema only need to be on your heart today. If you don't have the proper pause, what the pasuk is actually saying is what I'm commanding you today, right? That it should be on your heart, right? As opposed to saying Hayom al levacha, that's like a phrase that the words of the Torah only need to be on your heart today, right? Okay. In case of how you korchen Shema, how would they wrap the Shema? They would not have proper pauses in the pasuk to Remeir, but they would pause. Rather, they would just skip that part. But on my time on reading. So, but why do we in fact say Baruch Shem Kvod Muslim Ved? Right? It's not in that passage in the Torah. So, Kididarsh Rishon Lakish. It's like Rishon Lakish expounded as follows. Okay. He says, "The Amr B'Shem Lakish, Vayikri Yaakov Abanav." Yaakov called to his sons, V'Yamar, and he said, "He Yasbu gathered together. V'Gil Lechem, I will tell you, Bikesh Yaakov Legalas the Banav Ketzei Yamin." He tried to explain. He wanted to reveal to his children the end of days. V'Nistaka Yemenu Shechina, and the Shechina was removed from him. Amar Shem Chas V'Shalom Yesh V'Mitasi Pasul. So maybe there's a disqualification among my children, right? Kavram Shiatzi Yemenu Yishmael, just like Avram had a puzzle son of Yishmael. Abi Yitzchak Shesimenu Esav. He also had a puzzle son. He had Esav. Amrulos, his son said to him, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What does that mean? Amru Keshem She'ein B'libcha Ela Echad. Just like there's only one God in your view, Kach Ani B'libeni Ela Echad. So do we believe there's also only one God. B'oseh Hashah. Pasach Yaakov Avinu V'Amar, and then he responded and he said, Baruch Shem Kvod Moshe L'Olam Va'ed. Okay. Amr Rabbanan, so the rabbis say, Hey Chinavitz, what are we going to do now? Who should we say it? Amr Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it. Lo Namru, maybe we shouldn't say it. Amr Yaakov, but Yaakov did say it. His kinus that they enacted you. Amr Moshe B'Chashai. The compromise is that we just say it quietly. Amr Rabbi Yitzchak, Amr Rabbi Devei Rabbi Ami, Marshal Labas Melech. So the analogy just follows. So let's say you have a princess. She richa tzike kedera. She smelled like the spices in the pot, right? V'im tamar yesh la ganai. So she's smelling some like really good stuff from the kitchen. Like I don't know, some kind of kitchen scraps or whatever. She really wants to eat. Sorry.
That's Shalom.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. We'll call it Shalom, whatever. Yeah. So, but it's like it's below her dignity to just go and like in chaperine these kitchen scraps or whatever, right? Lo tamer yesh latzar. But if she doesn't bring up what she wants, she's gonna have the pain of not having tasted it, right? So they started bringing her this thing from the kitchen on the down low. Okay. There was a takana to actually change it and actually say Baruch Shem in a loud voice. And they because the meeting would challenge, and they would say, "Really, you're engaging in like idolatrous whispers or something very inappropriate between Shema Yisrael and V'Ahavta. Or you're talking to another deity or whatever, right?" Like a meaning, but in there they didn't have these kind of problems with meaning. Adni Hashta Amri La V'Chashai. So they still say it quietly, and we say it quietly. I guess we're not so worried about this anymore. The people are going to think we're saying something inappropriate then. Tan Rabban Shisha Dvar Masa Anshi Yerichos, the 6 things that the men of Rivke did. So notice that the way it's being phrased here is different from our Mishnah, right? Here it's being set up. It's not did they protest or did they protest, but rather was it with their permission or was it with their with blessing or not? So it's a little different. So these are things that Chaim were pleased with. That they would graft the palm trees all day on Erev Pesach, they wrapped their Shema, and they would harvest the new grain before the carbon omer was brought. The following are things that the Chachamim were not pleased with. So stacking the new grain before the carbon omer reports in Pritzis, Begino Sehen rather. They would make breaches in their gardens, and in their orchards, in order to enable the poor to come and take food. Okay. Right? In order to enable, he explains, right? In order to enable right? So that's the problem, right? So feeding poor people is a great thing. The problem is they're enabling them to eat fallen fruit on Shabbos and Yantif, which is not such a good thing, right? Bishnei Batzaris, right? This is during years of drought, right? So there's there's a lot of people who are very hungry. So Matovim feeding hungry people is great. The problem is that they're facilitating them eating the kind of fruits on Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is a problem. Okay. Notice in Pei Yerek they would set aside a pay for vegetables. Biyadam chachamim. Okay, I'm sorry. I skipped a few lines here. Okay, sorry. Okay, so you have Machilan Okay, Matirin Gamzi Hektish. Right, so that's what we're up to. I'm sorry, right? So they would permit, again, these are the regrowths on the sycamore tree, which were, the trunks were concentrated. Shel Charuv. Shel Shekma. Alright, so whether it was a carob or a sycamore tree, Divir Meir says. Okay. Rivke says in right? The problem is Rivke objects to this formulation that there were 6 things, 3 things that the Chachamim were pleased with and 3 things they weren't pleased with. If the Chachamim were pleased with some of their things, then why didn't everybody do it? Why is it that just Anshe Richo are doing these things, right? Rather, Rivke says no. Really, everything, all 6 things were against the Rasan of Chachamim. 3 things they protested, and 3 things they did not protest. Okay, so here's Rivke's list. What did they not protest? Grafting the palm trees all day, wrapping the Shema, harvesting and stacking the new grain before the Korban Omer, and these are the things which they did protest. They would permit the regrowths when a tree trunk was consecrated, right, and these new branches grew in, whether it was a carob tree or sycamore tree, they permit the Anshricha would use them as though they're not hektish. They would make these breaches in their gardens, and I guess the walls or fences of their gardens and orchards, to feed fallen fruit to poor people in years of drought. And they will also set aside the corner for the poor in a field of vegetables. And these are the things that Chachamim protested. Okay, so here's the problem. Right? We just said Rabbi Yehuda holds that that all 6 things that the Anshe Richo did were really against the Ratzon of the Chachamim. Okay. Okay, and it's just a question of did they protest or not. So that's clearly we see here that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the harvesting new grain before the Korban Omer is something that the Chachamim were not pleased with. But we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite also. Right? It says we have a Mishnah. Anshe Richo kosen lefnei Omer. The many Richo harvest the new grain before the Korban Omer. And the Chachamim are pleased with it. They're fine with it. Kosen lefnei Omer, and they stack the grain before the Omer. The Chachamim are not happy with that. Right? Chachamim. Okay. But even though they weren't happy with it, they didn't protest. Now who's the one who sets it up that the difference between the different activities that the Anshe Richo did is whether there was a protest or not, but really the Chacham didn't agree with any of that? It's Rabbi Yehuda. And here, in this other Mishnah we have this other Mishnah from Menachem, right? Where Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that the harvest of the new grain before the Omer was b'ratzon Chachamim. So it's a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda. Was the harvest of the Anshe Richo of the new grain before the Omer, was that b'ratzon Chachamim or was it not b'ratzon Chachamim? Okay. But the Gemara has a different problem. It says, never mind this contradiction in Yehuda, the very fact there's an internal inconsistency over here. There's a basic problem with the setup in Yehuda because he says there's 3 things the Chacham weren't happy with, but they didn't protest. And if you look at it, actually there's a list. In the list there are 4 things, right? You have the harvesting and the stacking of the new grain, and you have what is the list here? Right. You have. Right. So you have the case. You have grafting the palm trees all day of Pesach, wrapping together the Shema, and harvesting and stacking the new grain before the Korban Omer. That's 4 things, and yet the list says there's 3 things. Okay, so we have a very basic problem already with this, right? It's not mechanic katsira. So what you have to do is you have to erase the word. You have to erase katsira, so that we're down to actually now back to 3 things, and then also once you erase katsira from that list, there's obviously no more contradiction, because really, in fact, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the harvesting of the new grain before the Korban Omer really is b'ratzon Chachamim. Okay. The next thing they said is they permitted the usage of these regrowths on a tree whose trunk was consecrated, both of whether it was a carob tree or a sycamore tree. So Amru, what do they say? Vanu Natir Gamdil Shal Hektish, right? They only consecrated the trunks of the trees, and we're going to permit using what the branches that grew subsequently, right? So we're talking about growths that the tree grows on the tree after the consecration of the tree trunk. Okay. Yeah, so they were relying on the opinion. There's machlokes. They were relying on. There's an opinion that it's something that grows. Something. Let's say a plant which is hektish, a plant which is concentrated. If it subsequently grows, the growths they're not subject to mi'ila, right? Mi'ila is the idea of improperly benefiting from hektish, right? So they're holding like the opinion who holds that the idea of mi'ila does not apply to something that grows on hektish. But the rabbis hold even though it's true there is no mi'ila, but there is still an isser. So, meaning just the fact that there's not mi'ila is not enough of a reason to permit outright using it. It just means that it's a lesser kind of problem, but there's still a prohibition involved in using these branches. Okay. Imports and pierces. So we said the next idea is that they were making breaches in their, to not enable poor people to come and take the fallen fruit and Shabbos and Yontif in their gardens and orchards. The machlokes is only when it comes to fruit that's on the higher branches of the tree, right? Meaning that it's detached, but it's kind of resting on these higher branches. So the rabbis held we don't want people doing that's usher, right? Because the problem is maybe he'll also detach fruits, right? Because meaning you have these fruits which are already detached and are just resting on the upper branches. The problem is we're worried maybe he'll also detach some of the fruits that are still attached to these branches. Okay, so that was the machlokes in the Chachamim and the Anshi Richo. Okay, but even the Chacham would agree that if the fruit were resting on the lower branches, that would be permitted for them to remove them. For them to remove them on Shabbos and Yontif.
Why?
And sorry.
What's the difference if it?
Because I think there's no fruit on those lower branches.
Right, though they fell and hadn't fallen all the way to the ground yet.
Right. This is the way Rashi understands. Tosas is not very happy with this explanation because you have these problems of hishtamshus be'ilan, which we know using a tree in the usage of a tree is very very much restricted on Shabbos. Tosas sets up a scenario that really they didn't become detached on Shabbos and Yontif. They came detached before already Shabbos and Yontif, and they were resting on the tree, and then they fell off the tree onto the ground during Shabbos and Yontif. So, according to Rashi, they're still sitting on the tree. According to Tosas, they're already on the ground. Okay, fine. Okay, so let's continue here. Sorry, yeah. So Amalei Rava. So Rava says, wait a second, how does that work? But there's muktzah, right? Why would everyone agree that it's permitted to eat the fruits from the lower branches, right? These detached fruit. So maybe you'll say, you know what? It was fit for ravens. Okay. Yeah. So again, the issue is right. In Rashi's understanding, it's one in Vav and Beis. Yeah. In Rashi's understanding, yeah, the fruit became detached during Shabbos and Yontif, during Shabbos or Yontif. So the question is, if they were attached to the tree at the beginning of Shabbos or Yontif, that means they're muktzah, right? Because we have this idea of something that was not fit to be used at the beginning of Shabbos or Yontif, then it retains that muktzah status throughout Shabbos. Okay, So the problem is now they became detached over the course of Shabbos. Okay, but how does that make them less problematic? They should still be considered muksa. Okay, so maybe you'll say, hold the chazi, the orvin. Maybe they were not really considered muksa because ravens could have come and eat them. Okay, so they were fit for ravens to eat because they can, they don't have a problem. They're allowed to come and pick off fruit that's attached to a tree on Shabbos, right? Hashta. So the problem is the Gemara is going to object to that sort of reasoning. But we see, we're going to show in a second that something that's considered prepared for human consumption is not considered prepared for dog consumption. So we're going to say for sure that it should be the same idea, that if something which is considered ready for ravens consumption should not be considered ready for human consumption. So let's just prove this idea of the human versus dog consumption. It's not. There's a Mishnah. So let's say you're sitting on Shabbos and you've got in front of you this animal carcass, this animal which dropped dead, right? So, and the question is, you want to know, can I feed it to my dog, right? So Ravita is saying, if at the beginning of Shabbos it was not an avela, right? It was still alive and well at the beginning of Shabbos, right? Asura, then it's also to feed it to your dog, because it's not considered muchan. It's not considered like it was ready for dog consumption. Okay, as long as it was live and well, the intention is, if I own a cow, so long as it's alive and well, my intention will probably be that I want to shecht it and sell it, and that's a lot more lucrative than just it makes a lot more sense, than the substituting this for kibbles or whatever, right? It makes more sense for human consumption. So that's what my intention probably is. So it's not considered ready for dog consumption. Okay, and it's muktzah. You can't feed it to your dog. Okay. So based on that, right? So for sure, if something is just merely ready for the ravens to eat, right? As long as it was attached to the tree, how could it be considered ready for human beings? And again, insofar as it was attached to the tree at the beginning of Shabbos, that should determine its status for the whole Shabbos. So Amar Leis, he said back to him, now yes, there is a difference between these two scenarios. When it's something which is considered designated for human consumption, that's not considered ready for dog consumption. Why? Anything which is fit for human beings to eat, he's not going to put out of his mind and say, well, no, that's just going to be for dogs, right? Sorry. Okay. Muchal la'arvim having muchal la'adam. But when it's considered for ravens, it's also considered ready for humans. Kol me'li lechazi le'inish daiti levei. Because anything which a person would be able to eat, he has his das on it, right? So we're saying it's more likely a person, something which could be ready for animals, that he would think, maybe I'll eat that, rather than the opposite, something that he might be able to eat to say, oh no, maybe my dog will eat that, right? Okay. So when Ravin came, he said as follows: the machlokes between the Chachamim and the Anshe Richo was about the fruit on the lower branches. So this is different from what we saw earlier. Instead of a machlokas about the upper branches, everyone agrees the lower branches is much. Now we're saying actually machlokas was the fruit of the lower branches. The Rabbanan Sari Muchal they hold if it's considered available for the ravens, it's not considered available for people, and therefore it's considered muktzah. The people of Richo held Muchal Adam, but if it's considered ready for ravens, it's also considered ready for people to eat. When it comes to the upper branches, they recall asur, and even in the Anshe Richo would agree that it's asur to get those fruits, right? Because they're afraid that maybe while you're getting these detached fruits from the upper branches, you also start detaching attached fruits from those branches. Okay. So this idea of setting aside a corner for the poor from vegetable fields. So the Chachamim were against this as well. Did the people of Richo hold of the following Mishnah? They set a rule when it comes to Peah. Anything which is, so these are the different criteria which are necessary for a produce to be subject to Peah. Okay, leaving the corner for the poor. Koshu ochel, anything which is food. right? Meaning it's considered normal to eat it. So we'll see what that's excluding. V'nishmar, and it's protected. V'gedula min haaretz, and it grows from the ground. V'liktasa ke'achas, and it's picked together. It's harvested all at once. Umachnisa l'kiyom, and one brings it in for storage. Chayav b'peh. So these are, you need all of these criteria to be subject to payah. So in Tosis they actually say that Mida Raisa it's only olives, wine, and grain which are subject to payah, and the fact that other things which also meet these criteria are subject to payah is actually only Midrabanan. But in any case, something which doesn't meet these criteria is not subject to payah at all. Okay, so what are these different things? These different criteria, what are they excluding? Okay. Kosher ochel, anything which is food, prat l'sfiche satis v'kotza, right? Things, the aftergrowths of woad and safflower. So these are technically edible, but they're not commonly eaten. V'nishmar, what does it mean? Is protected produce? Prat lehefker. That means that's excluding ownerless produce. V'gedila min haaretz. What is the idea that if growing from the ground coming to exclude prat kamein the patris is coming to include fungi, the truffles and mushrooms? These things don't. These are not considered growing from the ground. Another criteria we said is that they have to be harvested. The kind of produce that's harvested all at once. This comes to exclude figs, which they kind of ripen unevenly. You don't have the whole crop that ripens at once, so that you kind of are harvesting it gradually over time. Machnisa the kiyam, and also one of the criteria is they have to be bringing it in for storage. Pratliarik, this comes to exclude vegetables which are not generally brought in for storage. Okay, so we have again. So here we have this problem. We brought this Mishnah from Peah to tell me what, that we need all these 5 criteria to be subject to Peah. So what, the Anshe Richo didn't agree with this Mishnah in Peah that they were setting aside Peah from vegetables. We see the vegetables are excluded because it's something that's not brought in for storage. Okay, so we're talking about the heads of turnips. That was what the Anshe Richo were setting aside as Peah, Machnisa the Kiyam, like Dei Davaracher, Kamiflagi. So it's a bit of a gray area, you could say, because maybe, I mean, you could say it's you could understand how the Anshe Richo could argue their point of view, because it's something that one brings through to storage by way of something else, right? Right. Rashi says that they would store the leaves of the turnip by using the imahota, which I think are like the seeds of the turnip, right? So by using one part of the turnip, they would enable the storage of the other part of the turnip. And the question is that considered? Is that really considered something which you bring in for storage or not? Right?
Why did no one else do this?
Why did no one else store it in this fashion?
Yeah, if Yericho could argue that this is applicable for the Mishnah, why wouldn't anyone else argue the same?
To set aside, well, I mean, I don't know why are people like jumping to set aside Peah, right? Like they probably meant well, they want to give more to the poor or whatever, right?
Some have an issue with it.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you, the problem with setting aside Peah when it's not necessary is that then the poor people are going to treat it as though it's not subject to Trumas and Maisus, which is what, right? Whereas since it's not subject to Peah, it is subject to Trumas and Maisus. Okay. Okay. Fine. So let's continue here. Right. Okay. So yeah, that's the issue. All right. So you're saying why didn't other people have the same idea? I'm not sure. I don't know. They maybe they felt they were particularly looking for opportunities to give up Peah. They felt they were doing a chumrah, but really, in a sense, it's a chumrah which leads to a kula, right? Okay. Okay, Marsav Machnisa the Kima Divrach Shmeikim. So the Anshe Richo held, if you store it by using on something else, that's still considered something you bring for storage. And Marsav Shmeikim, one says, no, that is it's not considered bringing it in for storage. Should we do the next price also? Continue or no?
It's up to me.
Yeah. Okay. Stop there. Okay.